Her poor little girl, barefoot and cold, receives old and torn clothes from a stranger. But in the middle of the crowd, a millionaire observes the scene and something inside him changes. What he does next leaves everyone emotional. If this story interests you, subscribe to our channel to receive all our heartwarming stories. Continuing. The cutting winter wind swept through the dark streets of downtown, carrying with it dry leaves and abandoned papers. On the corner of Maple Street, leaning against a cold concrete wall, a small figure huddled, trying uselessly to protect herself from the cold that penetrated her bones. Emily, just 6 years old, clutched a soaked piece of cardboard to her chest, her only protection against the freezing night that seemed endless. Her small fingers, purple from cold, clung to the rags that barely covered her frail body. The dress, 3 sizes too big for her, was torn at the edges and stained with street dirt. Her hair, which must once have been a vibrant brown, was now tangled and dull, stuck to her forehead by the mixture of cold sweat and the fine drizzle that fell relentlessly. People hurried past on the sidewalk, some averting their gaze, others simply pretending not to see her. Their hurried footsteps echoed on the wet asphalt, carrying with them the warmth of their coats and the comfort of knowing they had a place to call home. Emily observed everything with her large brown eyes, which seemed to hold wisdom far beyond her few years of life. In the window of the bakery across the street, the reflection of golden lights danced on fresh bread and decorated cakes. The aroma that escaped through the door each time a customer entered or left made her stomach ache with hunger. Earlier, she had gotten a piece of hard bread that someone had thrown away, and she kept it carefully inside the torn pocket of her dress, as if it were a precious treasure. A group of executives passed by her, talking loudly about business and numbers that made no sense in her small world. Their shiny shoes splashed dirty water on her bare legs, but they didn't even notice. Emily just huddled more, trying to make herself even smaller, invisible as she felt. The night advanced, and with it the cold became more intense. Her teeth chattered involuntarily, and she tried to remember the last time she had felt real warmth. Perhaps it was that morning when she slept for a few minutes in the sun before the bank guard chased her away with shouts and threats. Or maybe it was longer ago, in memories so distant they seemed to belong to another life. The sound of sudden braking made her raise her eyes. A black, gleaming car had stopped near the corner, its chrome wheels reflecting the city lights. The door opened, and from it descended a tall man wearing an impeccable suit that seemed to cost more than everything Emily had ever seen in her life. Isaac Lawrence held his cell phone against his ear, his deep voice echoing in the night as he discussed numbers and deadlines with someone on the other end of the line. His 52 years were marked by gray strands at his temples and expression lines that betrayed a life dedicated to business. He was accustomed to dealing with millions in his daily transactions, to making decisions that affected hundreds of lives, but something that night made his gaze, trained on spreadsheets and contracts, shift to the small figure huddled on the sidewalk. For a moment, their eyes met. Emily didn't look away, as she normally would. There was something different about this man, something that made her remain motionless, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Isaac felt an inexplicable tightness in his chest, a sensation he had not experienced for a long time in his meticulously organized life. Without thinking, his fingers loosened his expensive tie, an automatic gesture he made when something bothered him. The voice on the other end of the line continued talking about mergers and acquisitions, but for the first time in years, Isaac wasn't paying attention. His eyes remained fixed on the girl, noticing details he had previously ignored: the bare and injured feet, the marks of dirt on the thin face, the tremor that shook her small body. A group of teenagers ran past on the sidewalk, laughing loudly and pushing each other. One of them bumped into Emily, causing the precious piece of bread to fall from her pocket and roll into the gutter. She tried to reach for it, but her legs, numb from the cold, didn't respond quickly enough. The dirty water swallowed her only, food carrying it away in a whirlpool of leaves and debris. Tears began to form in her eyes, but she held them back. She had learned long ago that crying solved nothing. It only made people look at her with more pity or contempt, and she didn't know which hurt more. Isaac observed the entire scene, feeling something inside him break. In his mind, numbers and spreadsheets began to mix with images of a childhood that no child should have. His phone kept ringing insistently, but for the first time in his life, business could wait. There was something more important happening there, something he didn't fully understand yet, but that made him want to change the course of that story. The night was just beginning, and neither Emily nor Isaac could imagine how their lives were about to become irreversibly intertwined. Fate sometimes chooses the most unlikely moments to change the course of two existences that at first glance couldn't be more different. Isaac hung up the phone, ignoring the various calls that kept coming in. His gaze remained fixed on the small figure who was now trying to stand up, leaning against the cold wall. His steps, normally firm and decisive, hesitated for the first time in a very long time. Years of business experience had taught him to maintain emotional distance from everything and everyone, but something in that scene prevented him from simply turning his back and going on his way. He approached slowly, trying not to scare the girl. Emily remained motionless, her large eyes observing every movement of the stranger approaching. Years on the streets had taught her to distrust everyone, but there was something different in the way this man looked at her. It wasn't pity or contempt. It was something she couldn't identify. "Are you hungry?" Isaac's voice came out softer than he had planned. The girl didn't answer, but her stomach audibly growled, betraying her attempt to appear strong. Without waiting for a response, he turned toward the bakery across the street. The warmth and aroma that greeted them inside the establishment made Emily blink several times, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. Her legs trembled, not just from cold, but from nervousness. The attendant cast a look of disapproval at her dirty clothes and bare feet, but Isaac completely ignored it, ordering several types of bread, cakes, and a bottle of hot milk. While they waited, Emily kept her eyes fixed on the illuminated display cases. Her reflection in the glass showed an image she barely recognized, a small, frightened girl, looking even smaller next to the tall man in a suit. Her fingers involuntarily touched the clean glass, leaving small marks that the attendant observed with displeasure. The businessman noticed the way she looked at a small chocolate cake, decorated with fresh strawberries. Without hesitation, he added it to the order. When they left the bakery, carrying bags full of food, Emily had still not said a single word. They found a nearby bench under the dim light of a lamppost. Isaac began to take the food out of the bags, offering the hot milk first. Emily's small hands trembled so much that he had to help her hold the cup. She drank slowly, savoring each sip as if it were the last she would have in her life. "What's your name?" Isaac tried again while opening a still warm bread. She hesitated for a long moment before answering in an almost inaudible whisper. "Emily." The name sounded strange to his ears, as if it carried a story he didn't yet know. He offered her the bread, and she took it carefully, as if it were something too precious to be touched. She ate in small bites, storing pieces in the torn pockets of her dress. "You don't need to save it," he said softly. "There's more here." But Emily continued her ritual, as if she couldn't believe that this kindness would last longer than that moment. The cold wind continued to blow, making the paper bags rustle. Isaac noticed that she trembled more and more, her lips beginning to turn purple despite the hot milk. Without thinking twice, he took off his Italian wool coat and placed it over her shoulders. It was at that moment that a group of young people passed by them, laughing loudly and pushing each other. One of them, wearing an expensive leather jacket, stopped when he saw the scene. His mocking laughter echoed in the night. "Hey, look at this, the little beggar got a brand-name coat." With a quick movement, he snatched the coat from Emily's shoulders, throwing it into a nearby puddle. His friends laughed even louder as he trampled the fine fabric, transforming it into a muddy rag. Isaac felt the blood boil in his veins. He rose abruptly, ready to confront the young men, but something stopped him. It was the way Emily reacted, or rather how she didn't react. She just lowered her head, as if that kind of cruelty was something common in her life, something she already expected. The young men walked away, still laughing, leaving behind not just a ruined coat, but also a deep mark on Isaac's conscience. He who had always prided himself on his power and influence felt completely powerless in the face of the casual cruelty he had just witnessed. Emily continued eating in silence, as if nothing had happened. But her hands trembled more than before, and it wasn't just from the cold. Isaac realized that she was crying, though she tried to hide the tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, surprising him, "for the coat." Those words hit Isaac like a punch to the stomach. A child who had nothing was apologizing for the cruelty of others. Something inside him changed at that moment, a silent but profound transformation. The clock of the nearby church struck 9, its chimes echoing in the increasingly empty streets. Isaac looked at his Rolex, then at the girl beside him. He couldn't simply leave her there, but he also didn't know exactly what to do. "Where do you live, Emily?" he asked, already fearing the answer. She pointed vaguely to a dark alley between two abandoned buildings. Isaac's heart tightened even more. How could a child call that place home? Before he could say anything else, his phone rang again. It was his assistant, reminding him of the important meeting he would have in half an hour with international investors. Millions were at stake that night. Isaac looked at the phone, then at Emily. The girl was already getting up, as if she understood that that moment of kindness had come to an end. She began to move away toward the dark alley, carrying her precious bags of bread. The businessman stood there, divided between two worlds that seemed impossible to reconcile. His phone kept ringing, insistently reminding him of his responsibilities, of his world of business and power. But his eyes couldn't leave the small figure moving away, carrying not just bread in her bags, but also the weight of a life that no child should bear. That night, Isaac couldn't concentrate on the meeting with the investors. While they discussed numbers and financial projections in his luxurious office on the 40th floor, his mind wandered to the dark alley where he had left Emily. The contrast between the gourmet coffee served in porcelain cups and the hot milk he had shared with the girl haunted him with every sip. The investors noticed his distraction. Thomas Reynolds, a corpulent American with decades of experience on Wall Street, gave him a questioning look when he took too long to answer a question about the projections for the next quarter. Isaac apologized, blaming fatigue, but he knew it was more than that. When he finally managed to get home, it was already past midnight. His triple penthouse, with a panoramic view of the city, had never seemed so empty and cold. He poured himself an expensive whiskey, a gift from an Arab partner, and walked to the balcony. Down below, the city lights shone like artificial stars, masking the shadows where people like Emily struggled to survive. Sleep didn't come. He tossed and turned in the king-size bed between Egyptian sheets that cost more than many families earned in a month. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Emily's dirty face, her large eyes carrying a weight that no child should know. The next morning, he cancelled all his meetings, something he hadn't done in years. His assistant, Marina, almost dropped the phone in surprise when she received the call. "But Mr. Lawrence, the meeting with the board." "Reschedule," was his only response before hanging up. He drove to downtown, parking his car in the same place as the night before. The alley where Emily had disappeared looked even more desolate in daylight. Dirty papers danced with the wind, and the smell of garbage and urine was stronger than the night before. He walked for hours, asking shopkeepers and homeless people if they had seen a small girl, approximately 6 years old. Most just shrugged. Some asked for money in exchange for information they clearly didn't have. A lady selling flowers on the corner said she sometimes saw a child sleeping near the church, but wasn't sure if it was the same one. When the sun began to set, Isaac was exhausted and frustrated. His Italian suit was wrinkled, his Italian leather shoes covered in dust. He sat on a park bench watching the people passing by. Families returning home after a day of work, children in uniform leaving school, all with a place to go, all with someone waiting for them. That's when he noticed a movement under a nearby tree. Among the shadows of the leaves, he recognized Emily's small figure. She was sitting on the ground, drawing patterns in the dirt with a twig. The bakery bags from the night before were carefully folded beside her, as if they were a treasure too precious to throw away. He approached slowly, not wanting to scare her. She noticed his presence even before he got close, her watchful eyes never ceasing to monitor the surroundings. but she didn't run away, as he feared she might. "Hi, Emily," he said softly, sitting on the ground beside her, not caring about his expensive suit. She continued drawing in the dirt, but he noticed that her hands trembled slightly. "Did you eat today?" he asked, noticing how she seemed even thinner in daylight. She nodded slightly, showing a piece of bread kept in the bag. It was from what he had bought the night before, now hard and a bit moldy. Isaac's heart tightened. She had rationed the bread as if she didn't know when she would get food again. In his world of business meetings and lunches at starred restaurants, the idea of someone saving old bread seemed to belong to another reality. "Let's go eat something," he offered, standing up and extending his hand. Emily looked at the extended hand with distrust, then at his face as if looking for some sign that she couldn't trust him. It was at that moment that a group of children ran by, chasing a ball. One of them tripped and fell near where they were. Her mother immediately ran to help her, hugging her and checking if she was hurt. Isaac noticed how Emily observed the scene, her eyes fixed on the embrace between mother and daughter, an expression of pain so deep on her face that it was almost physical. "Where is your mother, Emily?" The question escaped before he could contain it. The girl's face closed instantly, like a door slamming. Her small hands gripped the bakery bags more tightly, her knuckles turning white with the pressure. The silence that followed was more eloquent than any answer. Isaac realized that he had touched a wound too deep to be exposed so early. He tried to change the subject, talking about the bakery from the night before, about how they could try other types of bread and cakes. But something had changed. Emily seemed to have retreated into herself, like a small turtle hiding in its shell. Her eyes, previously alert, were now fixed on the ground, and her whole body had shrunk as if trying to make herself even smaller. The sun continued to descend on the horizon, painting the sky in orange tones. The shadows of the buildings stretched across the square, transforming it into a darker place. Some people were beginning to hurry home, while others emerged from the shadows, people who, like Emily, had nowhere to go when night came. Isaac looked at his watch, then at the girl beside him. He couldn't leave her there again, not knowing what he knew now, but he also didn't know exactly what to do. Taking a street child home wasn't something you learned in MBA courses or board meetings. His phone vibrated in his pocket, another important call, another business decision that couldn't wait. But this time, something was different. This time, the choice seemed clearer, even if the path ahead was completely unknown. The sky was darkening rapidly, and a fine drizzle was beginning to fall over the city. Isaac looked again at Emily, who remained seated, hugging her own knees. Her thin clothes were already beginning to get damp, and small tremors shook her thin body. "Come with me," he said softly. "I know a place where we can shelter from the rain." He extended his hand again, waiting patiently. This time, after several moments of hesitation, Emily accepted, her small, cold fingers barely encompassing the palm of his hand. They walked to a small family hotel in the next block. It wasn't the type of establishment that Isaac normally frequented. It was far from the luxury of the five-star hotels where he usually hosted his clients. But something told him that Emily would feel more comfortable there. The receptionist, a middle-aged lady named Mrs. Wilson, looked at them with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. It wasn't every day that a man in an expensive suit appeared with a child in a street situation. Isaac could feel the weight of her gaze as he filled out the registration. "Is she your daughter?" asked Mrs. Wilson hesitantly. Before Isaac could answer, Emily released his hand and took a step back, as if the simple questioning about their kinship was enough to break the fragile trust that was beginning to form. "No," he answered, honestly. "But she needs help." Something in the tone of his voice must have convinced Mrs. Wilson, because her gaze softened. She leaned over the counter, addressing Emily directly with a gentle smile. "You must be hungry, dear. I have some soup in the kitchen. How about it?" Emily looked at Isaac as if asking permission. He nodded encouragingly, and she followed Mrs. Wilson to the small kitchen at the back of the hotel. The aroma of homemade soup filled the environment, making the girl's stomach audibly growl. While Emily ate, sitting on a high stool near the stove, Isaac observed every detail. The way she held the spoon with so much care, as if it were something precious. how she blew on each spoonful with delicacy, even though the soup wasn't so hot anymore. How her eyes constantly scanned the environment, a habit acquired on the streets, where she always needed to be alert. Mrs. Wilson prepared a simple but clean room on the second floor. There were 2 twin beds with floral bedspreads, a small television on the wall, and a modest but functional bathroom. To Isaac, it seemed too basic. To Emily, it was like a palace. The girl entered the room hesitantly, as if she didn't believe it was real. Her fingers lightly touched the bedspread, feeling the softness of the fabric. When Mrs. Wilson brought clean towels and a child's pajama that had belonged to her granddaughter, Emily's eyes filled with tears. "The bathroom has hot water," Mrs. Wilson explained gently. "You can take a bath before sleeping." Emily looked at the bathroom door as if it was something magical. How long had it been since her last hot bath? Isaac preferred not to think about it. "I'll leave you to get settled," said Mrs. Wilson, heading to the door. But before leaving, she cast a significant look at Isaac. "Tomorrow we need to talk about the situation." After she left, a heavy silence fell over the room. Emily remained standing in the middle of the room, as if she didn't know exactly what to do with so much sudden comfort. "You can take your bath," said Isaac softly. "I'll stay out here." She entered the bathroom carrying the towels and pajamas, as if they were treasures. The sound of running water soon filled the environment, and Isaac allowed himself to sit on the edge of the bed, physically and emotionally exhausted. His phone vibrated incessantly in his pocket. Dozens of unread messages, missed calls, urgent emails. His corporate empire needed attention, but for the first time in his life, the numbers on his screen seemed insignificant. The sound of a muffled sob coming from the bathroom alerted him. He stood up, worried, and approached the door. "Emily, is everything okay?" There was no response, just the sound of running water and more contained sobs. Isaac rested his forehead on the door, feeling completely powerless. What had happened to this child that even a simple hot bath made her cry? When she finally came out of the bathroom, wearing the pajamas that were a bit too big, her eyes were red, but there was something different in them. A small spark of hope, perhaps. Her wet hair, now free from the dirt of the streets, revealed a light brown shade that he hadn't noticed before. "Better?" he asked, trying to smile. She nodded slightly, but didn't move. She stood between the bathroom and the bed, as if she didn't know if she had permission to occupy that space. "You can sleep," he said, indicating the bed. "You're safe here." Emily approached the bed slowly, as if expecting that at any moment someone would say it was all a cruel joke. When she finally lay down, her small hands gripped the bedspread tightly, as if fearing someone might take it away during the night. Isaac sat on the other bed, watching as she fought against sleep. Her heavy eyes kept opening, trying to maintain vigilance even in that safe environment. Old habits from the streets, he supposed, feeling his heart tighten. "Will you stay?" Her voice was just a whisper, so low that he almost didn't hear. "I will," he answered without hesitation. "You can sleep. I'm not going anywhere." Gradually her eyes closed, overcome by fatigue. Her breathing became deeper and more regular, but her hands remained clutched to the bedspread, even during sleep. Outside, the rain fell harder, beating against the hotel windows. Isaac remained awake, observing the small sleeping figure and wondering how his life had changed so completely in less than 24 hours. His phone vibrated once more. It was a message from his sister, asking why he hadn't shown up at the important business dinner that was scheduled for that night. For the first time in his life, Isaac didn't care about responding. The dawn brought with it a new reality for Isaac. He had dozed off sitting in the armchair in the room, and his neck hurt from the uncomfortable position. But that wasn't what bothered him. It was the look of panic in Emily's eyes when she woke up and didn't immediately find her bakery bags. "They're there," he pointed to the corner of the room where the bags were carefully folded. She visibly relaxed upon seeing them, but remained tense, sitting on the bed with her back straight, as if expecting that at any moment someone would come to expel her. A soft knock on the door made Emily cringe. It was Mrs. Wilson, bringing a tray with breakfast, fresh bread, butter, hot milk, and some fruit. The aroma filled the room, but the girl didn't move. "You can eat," encouraged Mrs. Wilson, placing the tray on the small table. "There's plenty." Even so, Emily waited until Isaac made a gesture of approval before approaching the food. She ate slowly, methodically, her eyes constantly moving between the door and the window. At every noise in the corridor, her shoulders tensed. "We need to talk," Mrs. Wilson said to Isaac in a low voice. "In my office." He hesitated, looking at Emily. "I'll be right back," he promised. She just nodded, but her hands gripped the milk cup more tightly. Mrs. Wilson's office was a small room at the back of the hotel, with old files and a faded family photo on the wall. She closed the door and got straight to the point. "You know, I can't ignore this, don't you? A child in a street situation. We have to notify the authorities." Isaac felt a knot in his stomach. Of course she was right. It was the correct legal procedure, but something inside him screamed that it wasn't. The solution. "Mrs. Wilson," he began, choosing his words carefully, "you saw how scared she is, how she acts. Something happened to this girl, something that made her end up on the streets. If we call the authorities now—" "And what's your suggestion?" she interrupted. "Keep her hidden here. You can't simply take a child from the street and decide you're going to care for her." Her words hit him like a slap. That's exactly what he was doing, wasn't it? Acting on impulse, moved by an emotion that even he didn't fully understand. A scream from upstairs interrupted the conversation. They ran back to the room, finding Emily huddled in a corner, trembling. The breakfast tray was intact on the table, as if she hadn't touched anything else after Isaac left. "What happened?" he asked, approaching slowly. She was going to take it," whispered Emily, pointing to the door. One of the maids was standing at the entrance, holding cleaning products. "I just came to change the towels," explained the woman, confused. Isaac understood. For Emily, any person who tried to take something from the room was a threat. How many times on the streets must she have had her few belongings stolen? "No one is going to take anything," he assured, kneeling beside her. "You're safe here." But her eyes said something else. They spoke of broken promises, of betrayed trust, of cold nights and days of hunger. How to convince someone so young and so hurt that this time would be different? Mrs. Wilson observed the scene from the door, her face softening. "Maybe," she said after a moment, "we can wait a few days. Give her time to feel safer." Isaac nodded, grateful. But he knew that a few days wouldn't be enough. The trauma he saw in Emily's eyes was too deep to be healed quickly. The rest of the morning passed, slowly. Emily refused to leave the room, even when Isaac suggested a walk. She was content to sit near the window, observing the movement of the street below, always alert, always vigilant. During the afternoon, Mrs. Wilson brought some children's books that belonged to her granddaughter. Emily took them with reverential care, her fingers tracing the colorful illustrations as if they were treasures. "Do you know how to read?" asked Isaac gently. She shook her head negatively, but continued turning the pages, inventing her own stories based on the figures. Isaac observed her, feeling a mixture of admiration and sadness. Even deprived of everything, she still managed to find beauty in small things. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Marina, his assistant, was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. "Mr. Lawrence, the board is demanding your presence. The shareholders are nervous. What should I tell them?" Isaac looked at Emily, absorbed in her picture book. "Tell them I'm resolving a family matter," he answered before hanging up. Family. The word echoed in his mind. How long had it been since he had really thought about it? His parents had passed away years ago, his sister was always too busy with her own life of luxury, and he had chosen work above everything. When night came, it brought with it a storm. The thunder made Emily curl up more and more in her bed, her eyes wide with fear. Without thinking, Isaac sat beside her and began to tell stories. Not the ones from the books she couldn't read, but simple stories about sunny days and safe places. Gradually, she relaxed, her eyes beginning to grow heavy. But before falling completely asleep, her small hand sought his, clinging as if it were an anchor amid the storm. Outside, the thunder continued, but inside the hotel room, something new was being born. something fragile and precious, like a small bud emerging amid the city's asphalt, something that neither of them was prepared to name yet. The third day at the hotel brought an unexpected change. Isaac was on the phone, trying to manage his company from a distance, when he noticed that Emily was no longer sitting in her usual place near the window. A moment of panic crossed him until he found her huddled under the bed, trembling. "Emily?" he called softly, bending down to see better. "What happened?" Her eyes were wide with fear, fixed on something beyond him. Isaac turned and saw through the open window a woman standing across the street. She wore a worn coat and was staring fixedly at the hotel. "Do you know that person?" he asked, keeping his voice calm despite the concern that was beginning to grow in his chest. Emily didn't answer, but her trembling increased. Her small hands gripped the carpet so tightly that her knuckles were white. Isaac quickly closed the curtain and sat on the floor, close to the bed, but not close enough to scare her even more. "No one is going to hurt you here," he promised. "You're safe." But she stayed under the bed for the rest of the day, refusing even to eat the lunch that Mrs. Wilson brought. Her eyes remained fixed on the covered window, as if expecting someone to burst through it at any moment. At night, when Isaac checked the street again, the woman had disappeared. But something had changed. The fear he saw in Emily's eyes wasn't the same general fear she had shown before. It was something specific, something or someone she recognized. Mrs. Wilson noticed the change too. "Something is wrong," she said to Isaac when he went downstairs to get dinner. "The girl is more scared than before. We need to do something." She was right, of course. They couldn't continue in this indefinite limbo. Sooner or later, questions would begin to be asked. A rich man staying in a modest hotel with a street child? It was the kind of story that attracted unwanted attention. Back in the room, Isaac found Emily sitting on the bed, hugging her knees. She had come out of her hiding place, but still seemed on maximum alert. "Do you want to tell me about the woman?" he asked gently, sitting on the other bed. Emily shook her head negatively, but her lips trembled as if she wanted to say something. Isaac waited patiently, already knowing the signs of when she was gathering courage to express herself. "She," began Emily, her voice almost a whisper, "she is not good." Those were the first words she had said about her past since he had found her. Isaac felt his heart accelerate, but kept his expression calm. "What do you mean, not good?" But Emily had already closed herself again, turning her face to the wall. Her small hands gripped the bedspread tightly, a habit he had noticed whenever she felt threatened. The silence was interrupted by knocks on the door. It was Marina, his assistant, looking completely out of place in the modest hotel corridor. "Mr. Lawrence," she said, her tone urgent, "the board is demanding an extraordinary meeting. They're threatening to call a vote of no confidence if you don't appear tomorrow." Isaac felt the weight of his corporate responsibilities falling on his shoulders. His absence was beginning to have serious consequences. Years of hard work, millions in investments, hundreds of jobs depended on his decisions. "I'll be there," he responded, closing the door before Marina could see Emily. When he turned, he found the girl looking at him with an expression that broke his heart. It was a look of resignation, as if she already expected to be abandoned again. "I need to go out tomorrow morning," he explained softly, "but I'll be back soon, I promise." Emily didn't respond, but her hands tightened even more on the bedspread. She had heard promises before, thought Isaac. How many times had those promises been broken? During the night, he heard her crying softly, trying to muffle the sobs with the pillow. He wanted to get up and comfort her, but something stopped him. Her crying carried a different weight now, as if the appearance of that mysterious woman had brought to the surface memories she was desperately trying to forget. For the first time since he found Emily, Isaac felt real fear. Not of the threats from the board or the legal complications that would certainly come, but of what might happen to her if he wasn't around to protect her. Mrs. Wilson promised to keep an eye on her during his absence, but that didn't ease his concern. There was something bigger happening, something he still didn't fully understand. The woman on the street, the terror in Emily's eyes, the silence loaded with meanings he couldn't decipher. When the sun began to rise, tinting the sky. Pink! Isaac was still awake, observing the small figure asleep in the bed beside him. She had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from crying so much, but even during sleep her body remained tense, as if expecting to need to flee at any moment. In a few hours, he would need to leave her to face his corporate world, a world of numbers, contracts and power that now seemed strangely empty compared to the challenge of protecting a frightened little girl. Outside, the city was beginning to wake up. Cars honking, people hurrying to work, life following its normal course. But inside that hotel room, time seemed suspended, caught between the dark past that Emily carried and an uncertain future that Isaac didn't know how to guarantee. The meeting room on the 40th floor was packed when Isaac arrived. Executives in expensive suits observed him with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. His own suit, though still elegant, showed signs of the last few days spent in the modest hotel, small creases that his Italian tailor would certainly disapprove of. "Gentlemen," he began, adjusting his tie as he took his place at the head of the table. "I apologize for my absence." "Absence," interrupted Victor Matthews, one of the oldest shareholders. "You practically disappeared, Isaac. 3 days without responding adequately. Important projects stalled, crucial decisions suspended. What's going on?" Isaac opened his mouth to respond, but his phone vibrated. It was a message from Mrs. Wilson. "She doesn't want to eat. She's asking for you." His heart tightened. He forced himself to put the phone away and concentrate on the meeting, but his mind kept returning to the small hotel room where Emily was probably sitting by the window, waiting for his return. "I'm dealing with a personal situation," he finally answered. "Something that requires my immediate attention." "Personal?" Victor laughed without humor. "Since when do you have a personal life, Isaac? For the last 20 years, you've practically lived in this office. That's why you built this empire, and now suddenly you decide to take time off without explanations." Victor's words were like needles, precise and painful in their truth. Indeed, when was the last time Isaac had allowed himself to care about something beyond business? The meeting dragged on for hours. Reports were presented, numbers discussed, decisions made. Isaac participated mechanically, his mind divided between corporate responsibilities and growing concern for Emily. When his phone vibrated again, almost 3 hours later, Mrs. Wilson's message made his blood freeze. "The woman is back. She's been standing on the corner for more than an hour. Emily is panicking." Isaac rose abruptly, interrupting the presentation of one of the directors. "We need to reschedule," he said, already heading for the door. "An emergency has come up." "Isaac," Victor's voice reached him before he got to the door. "If you leave now, we'll have no choice. The board will vote for your replacement." He stopped, his hand on the doorknob. 20 years of hard work, his entire corporate empire was at stake. But the image of Emily trembling with fear in her hiding place under the bed was stronger than any financial threat. "Do what you need to do," he responded, without looking back. The journey to the hotel seemed endless. When he finally arrived, he found Mrs. Wilson in the lobby, visibly nervous. "The woman left a few minutes ago," she informed, "but before she left this." She extended a crumpled piece of paper. It was an old photo, faded and with torn edges. It showed a younger woman with the same face they had seen on the street, holding a baby in her arms. On the back, a single word written in shaky handwriting: "Mine." Isaac ran up the stairs. He found Emily exactly where he imagined, under the bed, trembling. But this time there was something different in her look. It wasn't just fear, it was a deep old pain. "She's not going to take me, is she?" Her voice was just a whisper, but it carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. He knelt beside the bed, keeping a safe distance. "No," he answered firmly. "I won't let her." "Promise?" The word hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. How many promises had already been made and broken in her short life? "I promise," he said, and for the first time in his life he felt the true weight of a promise. Slowly, very slowly, Emily came out of her hiding place. Her eyes found the photo he still held, and her small body shuddered. "She hurt," she said, softly, the words coming out as if each one hurt, always hurt. Isaac felt a wave of anger so intense that he needed to breathe deeply several times to control himself. He wanted to ask more, to understand better, but he knew that each word was a battle for Emily. "Sometimes," she continued, her voice trembling, "she forgot to give me food, days and days. And when she remembered, her voice failed, and she hugged her own knees more tightly. 'You're safe now,' he repeated, wishing he could erase all the painful memories she carried. But was she really? The photo in his hands was a clear threat. The woman, Emily's mother, had not given up. And if she had legal rights over the girl, how could they protect her? The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the room. Emily finally agreed to eat a little, though her hands still trembled as she held the spoon. Isaac observed her every movement, noticing the signs of a deep trauma that years on the street hadn't caused alone. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. The board, the shareholders, his sister. His empire was crumbling, but for the first time in his life it didn't seem important. The only thing that mattered was the small girl sitting in front of him, fighting against demons that no child should know. Night fell over the city, bringing with it a fine, melancholic rain. In the hotel room, Emily finally fell asleep, exhausted by the fear and emotions of the day. Isaac remained awake, watching over her restless sleep, knowing that the most difficult battles were yet to come. Chutney. News of Isaac Lawrence's removal from the presidency of his own company was on the front page of the economic newspapers the next morning. Marina brought the copies to the hotel, her hands trembling as she delivered them. "The board voted last night," she explained, avoiding looking directly at her boss. "Victor Matthews takes over temporarily. The shares have already fallen 12%. Isaac just nodded, his eyes scanning the sensationalist headlines. "The end of the Lawrence Empire? Magnate abandons company without explanations? 20 years of work reduced to speculation and corporate gossip." "There's one more thing," continued Marina hesitantly. "Your sister is coming here. She said she needs to talk in person." The news made Isaac frown. Hannah, his older sister, rarely left her mansion on the coast, preferring to manage her part of the shares from a distance. If she was coming, the situation was more serious than he imagined. Emily, who had become accustomed to Marina's discreet presence in recent days, observed the conversation from her usual corner near the window. Her fingers played absent-mindedly with the hem of the new dress that Mrs. Wilson had gotten for her, but her eyes remained alert, catching every word, every gesture. "What's going to happen now?" asked Marina, her voice betraying concern for her own future. Before Isaac could answer, strong knocks on the door made Emily jump in fright, running to her hiding place under the bed. Hannah Lawrence entered like a storm, her expensive heels echoing on the modest floor of the hotel. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Her voice cut through the air like a razor. "All of our family's work thrown away because of what exactly?" Her eyes scanned the room until they found the small form hiding under the bed. The expression on her face changed from anger to incredulity. "So the rumors are true," she said, lowering her voice. "You really abandoned everything because of a street child?" "Hannah," Isaac's voice carried a warning, "this is not the time." "And when will it be?" she retorted. "When you've lost everything? When our name is dragged through the mud? Do you have any idea what's happening out there? The investors are in panic. The competitors are like vultures over our contracts, and you're here playing social worker." Each of her words made Emily shrink more under the bed. Isaac could see her small hands clutching the carpet, trembling. "You don't understand," he began, but Hannah interrupted him. "No, you don't understand. This girl probably has family somewhere. Family that must be looking for her. You can't just—" She hurt. The small, trembling voice that came from under the bed made Hannah stop mid-sentence. Emily had partially come out of her hiding place, her large eyes fixed on the elegant woman who was shouting at her protector. "She hurt," she repeated, her voice firmer this time. "Every day, and when I cried, she hurt more." The silence that followed was deafening. Hannah blinked several times, as if for the first time really seeing the girl beyond her condition as a street child. Sometimes, continued Emily, the words, coming out as if a dam had broken, she brought bad men, they gave her money, and she used it all on medicine that made her sleep for days. I was hungry, but I couldn't wake her up. If I woke her up... Her voice failed and she shrank again, as if the simple act of talking about it could bring that reality back. Hannah sat heavily in the nearest chair, all her aristocratic pose crumbling. Marina, who had remained silent until then, had tears in her eyes. "Is that why you ran away?" asked Isaac gently, kneeling near the bed. Emily nodded. "But she always finds," she whispered. "Always comes back." "Not this time." Hannah's voice sounded different now, softer. "Not if it depends on us." Isaac looked surprised at his sister. She held his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. "I'm going to call Thomas," she said, taking out her phone. "He's the best family lawyer I know, and I have some contacts in social services who can help, but Isaac..." She hesitated. "This won't be easy. That woman is legally her mother." "She's not my mother." Emily's voice sounded firm, despite the trembling in her lips. "Mothers don't hurt." Hannah swallowed hard, clearly affected by the painful wisdom in the girl's words. Her gaze met her brother's again, and this time there was determination in it. "All right," she said, straightening her shoulders. "Let's do this right, but you're going to need help. You can't keep hiding in this hotel forever." Isaac knew she was right. The hotel was a temporary refuge, but not a solution. Emily needed stability, security, a real chance to have the childhood that was stolen from her. The afternoon was falling outside, and with it came a fine rain that beat against the hotel windows. Emily had returned to her favorite corner, hugging her knees as she watched the drops run down the glass. Her reflection showed a different girl now, still scared, still hurt, but with something new in her eyes, something that looked very much like hope. The rain hadn't let up for 3 days, transforming the city streets into grey rivers. From the 12th floor of the law office, Isaac watched the people below, tiny under their umbrellas, while Thomas Anderson, the lawyer recommended by Hannah, explained the complexity of the situation. "The evidence of neglect and abuse is clear," he was saying, leafing through a thick folder. "But without formal complaints, without medical records, without witnesses willing to testify, it's going to be a difficult battle." Isaac turned his gaze from the window, feeling the weight of each word. "And if we found other people from the neighborhood, someone must have seen something." Thomas shook his head. "It's a double-edged sword. The more we investigate, the more attention we'll attract, and that might make the biological mother disappear with the girl before we can act legally." The mere mention of this possibility made Isaac's stomach turn. He had left Emily at the hotel with Hannah, who surprisingly had become a constant and protective presence in recent days. The girl still didn't fully trust her, but at least she no longer hid when she appeared. "What about adoption?" he asked, although he already knew the answer. "With the biological mother alive and claiming custody, practically impossible without her consent." Thomas paused, adjusting his glasses. "Besides, you're single, with no experience with children, and you've just been removed from your company. You're not exactly the profile the judge is looking for." The silence that followed was interrupted by the ring of Isaac's phone. It was a message from Hannah. "She had a nightmare. She's asking for you." "I need to go," he said, getting up. "Isaac," called Thomas when he was already at the door. "There's one more thing. We received a summons. Her mother is demanding the immediate return of the girl." The journey to the hotel seemed longer than normal. The rain battered the car's windshield, making the view of the street almost impossible. Or maybe it was just the tears he refused to let fall. When he arrived at the room, he found Hannah sitting on the edge of the bed where Emily slept a restless sleep. His sister, always so composed and distant, was gently stroking the girl's hair. "She screamed during the nightmare," whispered Hannah. "She called for help, begged not to be hurt more." Isaac sat on the other bed, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. How can someone do this to a child? "Some people don't deserve to be parents," Hannah responded, her voice carrying a bitterness he rarely heard. "But others..." She looked significantly at her brother. "Others seem born for it, even if they don't know it." Emily moved in her sleep, Her face contracted, as if fighting against bad memories. Isaac noticed that she was holding something against her chest. It was one of his ties which he had forgotten in the room days ago. "She took it when you left," explained Hannah, noticing his look. "She said the smell reminded her of safety." The simplicity of that phrase hit Isaac like a punch. Safety. Something so basic, so fundamental, that this child had never known until now. A particularly strong thunder made Emily wake up startled. Her eyes, still clouded by sleep, frantically searched the room until they found Isaac. Only then did her body visibly relax. "You came back," she whispered, as if she needed to say the words out loud to believe it. "I always come back," he responded, fighting against the knot in his throat. Hannah rose silently, picking up her purse. "I'm going to talk to some contacts," she said. "There must be a way." After she left, Emily sat up in bed, still clutching the tie. "I had a bad dream," she confessed softly. "Do you want to tell me about it?" She hesitated, playing with the silk of the tie between her fingers. "She was there," she finally said, "with the bad men. They wanted to take me again." "Again?" Isaac felt his heart tighten. Emily nodded, her eyes focused on a distant point. "Sometimes when she needed money, they would take me, for days." Her voice was just a whisper. "They made me work on the streets asking for money. If I didn't get enough..." She didn't complete the sentence, but she didn't need to. The marks on her soul said everything that her words couldn't express. The rain continued to fall outside, its constant noise filling the silence that followed. Isaac wanted to promise that none of that would happen again, that he would protect her forever, but Thomas's words echoed in his mind, reminding him of how fragile his legal position was. "You know," said Emily after a while, her voice surprisingly firm for someone so small, "before I met you, I thought all grown-up people were bad, that they only knew how to hurt." She paused, her fingers still playing with the tie. "But you're different. You make me feel..." She searched for the right word, her forehead furrowed in concentration. "Safe." The simplicity of that declaration, the absolute trust in her voice, made something inside Isaac break and rebuild, itself at the same time. No matter what happened, no matter how many legal battles he had to face, he would find a way. He had to find one. The morning began with a strong knock on the hotel door. Mrs. Wilson ran up the stairs, her face pale, with concern. "It's the police," she whispered to Isaac, "with a social worker and..." She hesitated. "She's with them." Isaac felt his blood freeze. Emily, who was sitting on the floor drawing with the colored pencils that Hannah had brought, immediately realized that something was wrong. Her eyes widened with fear, and the blue pencil she was holding fell from her trembling hand. "Don't let them," she begged, her voice almost inaudible. "Please." The knocks on the door got stronger. "Mr. Lawrence?" An authoritative voice called. "We're from Child Services. We have a court order." Emily was already running to her usual hiding place under the bed, but this time Isaac gently stopped her. "Trust me," he whispered. "I won't let anything happen to you." The door opened, revealing two police officers, a severe-looking social worker, and behind them, the woman Emily so feared. Rebecca Sanders looked even thinner and more haggard than in the photo, her red and restless eyes betraying her altered state. "My daughter!" she shouted, trying to enter the room. "You stole my daughter!" The police officers restrained her, while the social worker, who introduced herself as Dr. Martha Sullivan, stepped forward. "Mr. Lawrence," she began, her voice professional but not devoid of compassion. "We have a formal complaint of kidnapping. Miss Sanders is the biological mother of the minor and demands her immediate return." Emily grabbed Isaac's hand so tightly that her small nails left marks on his skin. Her entire body was trembling. "You can't take her," he said, keeping his voice calm despite the panic he felt. "She suffered abuse. There's evidence." "Lies!" Rebecca shouted again. "He's making this up. I'm her mother. She loves me, doesn't she, baby? Tell them." But Emily just shrank more behind Isaac, hiding her face in his back. "Mr. Lawrence," continued Dr. Sullivan, I understand your concern, but without concrete proof of abuse and without legal authorization to keep the minor under your care, you are committing a crime. Proof? Hannah's voice sounded from the door, making everyone turn. She entered the room holding a folder. How about this? She opened the folder on the table, spreading photographs and documents. Hospital records of suspicious domestic accidents, statements from neighbors, school reports indicating signs of neglect, and most importantly, she took an envelope from her purse. The result of the toxicology test we secretly did on the clothes Emily was wearing when my brother found her. Want to know how many illegal substances were found? Rebecca Sanders visibly paled. Dr. Sullivan took the documents, examining them with growing attention. This changes the situation, she finally said. We'll need to investigate these allegations before any decision about custody. No! Rebecca lunged forward, managing to break free from the police officers. She's mine, mine. Everything happened very quickly. Rebecca managed to grab Emily's arm, pulling it forcefully. The girl screamed in pain, and Isaac reacted instinctively, protecting her with his body. In the confusion that followed, Rebecca was restrained again, but not before Emily saw something that made her scream in real terror. A man standing in the hallway, partially hidden in the shadows. One of the bad men from her darkest memories. "You promised," she shouted at her mother, her voice laden with pain and betrayal. "You promised they would never hurt me again." The man quickly disappeared upon hearing voices approaching. It was Thomas, the lawyer, and two more social workers that Hannah had called. Rebecca was taken away by the police officers, screaming and struggling, while Dr. Sullivan furiously made notes on her clipboard. When the room finally became calmer, Emily was still trembling in Isaac's arms. Her eyes were dry. She had learned long ago not to cry, but her small body was so tense that it seemed it could break at any moment. "It's all okay now," he murmured, stroking her hair. "You're safe." Hannah approached, kneeling beside them. "We got a restraining order," she explained softly. "She can't come near you anymore, Emily. Neither her nor anyone who wants to hurt you." The girl lifted her face from Isaac's shoulder, looking at Hannah with a mixture of fear and hope. "Promise?" "I promise," responded Hannah, and for the first time since Isaac had known her, he saw tears in his always so controlled sister's eyes. Outside, the rain had finally let up, and a timid ray of sunshine entered through the hotel window. But the battle was far from over. Rebecca still had legal rights, and the process would be long and painful. Emily seemed to understand this, even being so small. When she finally managed to calm down enough to release Isaac, she went to her abandoned drawing on the floor. It was a house, he realized, with three figures holding hands in front, a small one, a tall one, and a medium-sized one. "It's us," she explained softly. "You, me, and Aunt Hannah, a real family." The words hung in the air like a prayer, a wish, a possibility that now, for the first time, seemed real. The weeks that followed were an emotional roller coaster. The case had attracted media attention, and now reporters accumulated in front of the hotel, trying to capture images of the magnate and the street girl, as the headlines called them. Mrs. Wilson had to hire extra security to keep them away. A particularly difficult afternoon, while Emily took her usual nap, Hannah entered the room with an expression that Isaac knew well. She had important news. "Thomas got something," she said in a low voice, sitting in the armchair by the window. "One of the men that Rebecca used to exploit Emily decided to testify." Isaac felt his heart accelerate. "Why? Why now?" "Apparently he's sick. Terminal." Hannah ran her hand through her hair, a rare gesture of nervousness. "He said he doesn't want to die carrying this weight on his conscience." The sound of footsteps in the corridor made them both fall silent. It was just Mrs. Wilson bringing the afternoon snack, but the protective instinct was always alert now. "There's more," continued Hannah when they were alone again. "Rebecca is hospitalized. Overdose. The doctors don't know if she'll—" A movement on the bed interrupted the conversation. Emily was sitting up, her large eyes fixed on Hannah. How much had she heard? "Mommy is sick," she asked, her voice small but firm. Isaac and Hannah exchanged worried looks. How to explain something so complex to a child who had already lived through so much? "Yes," Hannah finally answered. "She's in the hospital." Emily was silent for a long moment, playing with the hem of the new dress she was wearing, a gift from Mrs. Wilson. "She was always sick," she finally said. "When the medicine ran out, she screamed a lot and cried and hurt." Isaac approached the bed, sitting on the edge. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." But something had changed in Emily. It was as if a floodgate had opened, and now the words flowed like a long-dammed river. "Sometimes she was good," she continued, her voice distant as if recalling something very old. "When she wasn't sick, she made food and sang, but then—" her voice failed. "Then she forgot again, about me, about everything." Hannah approached too, sitting on the other side of the bed, her hands, always so firm when signing million-dollar contracts, trembled slightly. "What are you feeling?" she asked softly. Emily furrowed her brow as if trying to understand her own emotions. "I don't know," she admitted. "It hurts here," she pointed to her chest. "But it's not the same as when she hurt me. It's different." "Sometimes," said Hannah, choosing her words carefully, "we can feel sadness for someone even when that person hurt us. That doesn't mean what she did was right. Is she going to die?" Emily's question was direct, without beating around the bush, as only children can be. "We don't know," Isaac answered honestly. "The doctors are taking care of her." "Like you take care of me?" The simplicity of the question hit Isaac like an arrow. "Different," he said. "I take care of you because I want you to be happy, safe and healthy. Because I want to see you grow up and achieve your dreams. Even though I'm not your real daughter." The room fell silent for a moment. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in orange tones that entered through the window and danced on the walls. "Family," said Hannah, surprising everyone with the emotion in her voice, "isn't just a matter of blood. It's a matter of love, of care, of wanting the best for the other above all else." "Like the three of us?" asked Emily, looking at the drawing that was still attached to the wall, the house with the three figures holding hands. "Exactly like the three of us," confirmed Isaac, feeling something warm and comforting spread in his chest. At that moment, Hannah's phone rang. She answered and listened in silence for several minutes, her face changing expression several times. When she hung up, her eyes were misty. "That was Thomas," she said. "Rebecca. She didn't make it." The silence that followed was heavy, laden, with emotions too complex to be named. Emily remained very quiet, looking at her own small hands. "She won't feel pain anymore," she finally said, her voice just a whisper. "Nor make others feel it." Isaac felt tears escape from his eyes. How could such a small child carry so much wisdom, so much understanding of the complexity of life? "What happens now?" she asked, looking between Isaac and Hannah. Hannah took her small hand between hers. "Now," she said, "we can do what should have been done from the beginning. We can make you officially part of our family." "Forever?" "Forever," confirmed Isaac. The sun had completely set now, but the room seemed more illuminated than ever, not by exterior light, but by something that came from within, the light of hope, of love, of the possibility of a new beginning. Emily got up from the bed and went to the window, looking at the city lighting up below. For a moment, she seemed larger than her 6 years, as if carrying the weight and wisdom of many lives. "She was my mother," she said softly. "But you are my family." 6 months passed since that night at the hotel. The Lawrence mansion, once a cold symbol of power and wealth, had been transformed. Children's laughter echoed through the corridors, colorful drawings adorned the once austere walls, and toys shared space with the old pieces of art. On that special morning, Emily was sitting on the edge of her bed, wearing a new blue dress. Hannah was fixing her hair, now well cared for and shiny, while softly humming. In the mirror, the reflection showed a different girl from the one who had trembled with cold on the streets. Her eyes still carried the memories of the past, but now they shone with something new, happiness. "Are you nervous?" asked Hannah. finishing a delicate braid. "A little bit," admitted Emily, her hands playing with the hem of the dress, a habit that remained from difficult times. "That's normal," smiled Hannah, now officially her aunt. "Today is a very special day." Downstairs, Isaac paced back and forth in his office, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. It was the same tie that Emily had held so many nights at the hotel, seeking comfort in its smell of safety. Now it was clean and pressed, special for the occasion. Mrs. Wilson, who had become a constant presence in their lives, entered carrying a tray with tea. "The judge will arrive in an hour," she informed, "and the guests are already starting to arrive." The mansion's garden had been decorated with white and blue flowers. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle, and a small table with a white tablecloth occupied the center. It was an intimate ceremony, just the people who had been part of that extraordinary journey. Marina was there, of course, organizing the last details with her usual efficiency. Thomas, the lawyer who had tirelessly fought for the case, was talking with Dr. Sullivan, the social worker who, after getting to know the situation better, had become a fundamental ally. When Emily finally came down the stairs, hand in hand, with Hannah, an emotional silence took over the environment. She was no longer the scared girl from the streets. She had grown, not just in size, but in confidence and joy. The judge, a gentleman with white hair and a gentle smile, conducted the adoption ceremony with simple and touching words. When the time came to sign the papers, Emily, who now knew how to write her name thanks to daily lessons with her private tutor, held the pen with determination. "Emily Lawrence," she pronounced clearly, writing each letter with care. Isaac, when signing next, had to stop several times to wipe his eyes. These weren't just papers he was signing. It was the promise of a lifetime of love, protection, and care. "Now it's official," declared the judge, smiling. "You are legally father and daughter." The small crowd applauded, and Mrs. Wilson couldn't contain her tears. Hannah hugged her brother and niece, forming the small family circle that Emily had drawn so many months ago. Later, during the small celebration in the garden, Emily pulled Isaac to a quiet corner, away from the guests. "Dad," she said, testing the word she could now officially use. "Can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, my little one." "Remember when you found me that night near the trash can?" Isaac nodded, feeling his heart tighten with the memory. "That day," she continued, "I had prayed, asked for someone to save me." Her large eyes met his. "And you appeared." Isaac knelt to be at her height, feeling the tears return. "No," he said softly, "it was you who saved me." Emily tilted her head, confused. "Me?" "Yes, I lived in a cold world, concerned only with money and power. You taught me what really matters. You taught me about love, courage, and forgiveness." She thought for a moment, processing his words. "So we saved each other." "Exactly," he smiled, pulling her into a hug. From across the garden, Hannah observed the scene with a smile. The Lawrence Company was again under Isaac's control, but now it was different. Part of the profits went to support programs for street children and another part to rehabilitation clinics for drug addicts. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with the same colors as that first night when Isaac found Emily. But now, instead of shadows and fears, there was light and hope. "Dad," called Emily, taking his hand. "Let's go home?" Isaac smiled, feeling his heart overflow with love. "Yes, my daughter. Let's go home." And so, hand in hand, father and daughter walked toward the mansion that was now truly a home. Not because of the luxury or grandeur, but because of the love that overflowed from its walls. A love that had been born on the cold streets of a winter night and that now finally had found its place in the world.